Today's video has been sponsored by our partners at The Sojourn, because the complete Season 1 is now available with a subscription to Nebula, which has a special discounted price for Sojourn fans, and Spotify Premium in some regions. It contains all 12 episodes, including 3 brand new ones from Volume 4, of this critically acclaimed audio drama, featuring a full voice cast including Martin Roach from The Expanse, and Ben Prendergast from God of War Ragnarok and Apex Legends. The season is now available on all the big services including Audible, Spotify, Google Books and Apple Books, and many more. Every episode is also available on the lowest tier of the Patreon linked below, and higher tiers get access to amazing bonus content including the visual dictionary, a ship identification chart by Star Trek Online's Thomas Morone, a hugely detailed ship cross-section poster, and 10 anthology shorts. If you don't know what The Sojourn is, then head over to their YouTube channel for free samples as well as extra lore content and ship breakdowns. The Sojourn, the complete first season, out now. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana and today we'll be covering stealth, though I think the better term for it is low observability. The word stealth just has some connotations and myths around it that low observability neatly steps around, but I'll still use both throughout the video for familiarity's sake. To start with, stealth tech doesn't really make something completely invisible. And no, I don't mean the wibbly wobbly shimmering cloaking tech. I'm not even going to talk about that today, as I feel that cloaking comes under electronic warfare, a topic that will be covered in a future video, so subscribe for that. Stealth turning something invisible to sensors is certainly the goal, rendering a vehicle or other object not visible to sensors looking for it, be they radar, infrared, sonar, or whatever. But the word invisibility conjures up the idea of an object completely vanishing, and while stealth tech can get you very close to that for a particular type of sensor, it doesn't necessarily apply to all types of sensor. It's splitting hairs really, as an object may be functionally invisible to any sensor that matters. Even something extremely simple like moving around in the dark counts here, as does camouflage. For example, the cloak that hides the hobbits near the gate to Mordor did make them functionally invisible to the eyes of those troops. But you all aren't here for hobbits. You want to hear about stealthy vehicles, and for that we have to start with radar, by far the most common and effective method of watching the skies for aircraft. The way it works is basically by shooting out radio waves and then measuring what comes back to figure out how far away the object that bounced the wave is. Depending on how much signal is returned also gives the radar cross-section of the object, which is the key factor that needs to be reduced for stealth. After radar came into widespread use, it was noticed that certain planes would reflect it more or less depending on their shape that faced the emitter. Some aircraft were just good at bouncing away radar signals in the wrong direction, so they were never received, making their radar cross-section a lot smaller. A notable example of this is the big, flat and smooth Avro Vulcan. So the basic knowledge of stealth shaping was known long before the F-117, and was even applied to the A-12 and its siblings in the 1960s. In fact, it was very well understood by that time because a Soviet scientist called Pyotr Ufemtsev had written a book on it in 1962. So why didn't the Soviets have loads of stealth planes flying around? Simply put, they just didn't have the computing power needed to practically apply the maths, but the Americans did. That is where the F-117 Nighthawk came from, with everything about its highly faceted shape being computer designed to bounce radar waves the wrong way. It was also covered in sheets of special radiation absorbent materials, or RAM, which take the radio waves and convert them to heat. All this contributed to the Nighthawk's small radar cross-section, but it was far from invisible. In fact, 2 F-117s were engaged in 1999 over Yugoslavia, one of which was shot down by a supposedly obsolete surface-to-air missile, largely down to complacency and a bit of luck. Thanks to being unsupported by other air assets and running the same route repeatedly, the Nighthawk was spotted by a low-frequency radar and locked on, after some attempts, by the missile battery, and subsequently shot down. That was a first-gen stealth aircraft though, and since then, computers have gotten better, and so they can calculate stealthy curves to better reflect, scatter, and diffract radar waves. Better computers are also used for controlling strangely shaped aircraft that lack vertical stabilizers, like the super low observable B-2 Spirit and its descendants. But those craft still have to make concessions to aerodynamics in order to fly, and need control surfaces somewhere. A spacecraft has very different requirements, and since aerodynamics is not one of them, then surely we can make something that is closer to the ideal stealth shape. Well, yes, you could make a really flat spacecraft with no corners at all, like a saucer, but that shape is still only ideal for aircraft since they fly along parallel to the ground and relatively near to it. They want to hide from things largely to their front, sides and rear, but a spacecraft would need to hide from any angle. A saucer would be very hard to spot from the edge, but it's definitely going to be reflecting from that flat top and bottom. Another issue to consider is that range in space is significantly higher, and active radar works at half light speed because it has to go out and then come back. Passive radar sort of works at full light speed since you're just listening to what comes in, but that relies on some signal somewhere being emitted, which may not be the case. Either way, depending on how much space you're trying to monitor, the sheer volume of space can be a pretty big concern. It's one thing to keep an eye on the skies over a continent, but a whole other thing trying to watch light minutes around a planet or even chunks of a solar system. The other really big way of looking at vehicles is infrared or IR light. Engines run hot, jet engines even more so, and finding ways to mask that signature is extremely important. The really high-end stealth jets bury their engines deep and only have small slots for exhaust, completely hidden from almost any angle except for directly behind. The exhaust plume itself can also be cooled by injecting cold air into the stream. Reducing the IR signature is something also done to ships and ground vehicles through similar methods, and you may have seen pictures of tanks in these big comfy blankets, which are designed to stop them showing up on thermal images quite so obviously. There's even been work done on active IR camouflage to make a tank look like something it isn't. All these measures can be applied to spacecraft too, as they are big floating heat machines full of computers, reactors and people, with big hotspots like engines. Depending on the setting, they may even have radiators which are specifically designed to emit IR radiation. What makes things worse for hiding is that IR sensors work at light speed because infrared radiation is actively being emitted. All you need to do is look for it, and against the near absolute zero background of space, it doesn't take much to stand out. The solution to this is to reduce your vessel's skin temperature to match that of the background, just like those IR camouflage options that armoured vehicles make use of. For this, you need coolant to circulate through the hull and a heatsink of some sort, just like the Normandy uses. This is only a temporary solution though, as eventually the heatsink will start to warm up the ship itself unless you turn all your systems off. Though if you use something warmer like a planet as your background, you can extend the time you can hide for. Also, engine burns are a problem unless you have a magic fake gravity drive like the Normandy does, because engines and the exhaust plume will show up on IR. One solution to prevent internal overheating is to just radiate the energy away in a direction the enemy cannot see, or by doing it behind a planet, which, yeah, it would work, but knowing where it's safe is situational. And what if the enemy has a stealth sensor satellite you don't know about? Another solution is to just be really clever with your ship design so that it essentially becomes a submarine in space. Such craft boil off hydrogen or helium and make use of super thin, low temperature ribbon radiators that are really hard to see, as well as hidden rocket nozzles that are large enough to let plume gases cool down. The Tough SF blog that we've mentioned before goes over these so-called steamer ships in way more detail than this video needs, so if you're interested in this concept and not scared of a little math, then go check it out. One big downside to any stealth craft is that they likely have worse sensors than their unstealthy kin. All sensors need to be able to see, but to see they may compromise your stealthy shape or stealthy hull material, and any active sensor obviously emits energy that can be picked up. As an example, the F-22 and F-35 have radars that can function in a low probability of intercept mode to reduce the chances of being spotted. But they do something else that I think is even cleverer. These radars are behind the aerodynamic nose cones that have just got to be radar transparent in one direction only or something in order to maintain the plane's stealthiness. Here's another thing to think about. A stealthy object only has to beat the sensors of its enemy, and maybe not even all of them at once. Take the outer layers of the defense onion. Yes, there's avoiding being detected, but there's also avoiding identification and avoiding being tracked. If you complete your mission while being detected, but the enemy was never able to lock you to shoot you down, then that's a success. Even just careful planning can let you get somewhere without needing to be completely invisible. That's why I prefer the term low observability, as your observability just needs to be lower than what the enemy sensors are capable of observing. If your craft just looks like background noise, then congratulations, you can float spy balloons over to North America. This even helps in a combat situation, as being stealthy can have a positive psychological effect in favour of the stealthed object. Sure, their enemy might know something is there somewhere, but can get tunnel visioned looking for it, or start jumping at shadows and chasing sensor ghosts. Low observability, or stealth, is a tool like anything else. It's less effective in space because there's less clutter to hide in, but is possible, and ends up creating different options. There's even real-life examples of stealth in space, like the Misty satellite, which concealed the deployment of a big reflective shield in a fake explosion. Even the James Webb Space Telescope can sort of count, as it has a thermal shield that lets the sciencey side work at only 40 degrees above absolute zero. But similar outcomes to stealth can be achieved with not even bothering with any of that. Simple camouflage can work just as well, it's just less repeatable in a space setting but may only need to work once. All of this also ignores the powerful effect that electronic warfare can have. If someone's actively blinding you, then any other craft becomes completely undetectable, but that is a topic for a future video. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to check out The Sojourn, the complete first season, and the extra content on their YouTube channel and Patreon. Links are below in the description and pinned comment. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.